If you like what you're listening to, please support this project on our Patreon, patreon.com/mtgbooks. Your support is necessary and appreciated. Thank you. Hey, everyone. Phil Dawson here. Magic the Gathering Unofficial Audiobooks Podcast. Hello. Welcome in. Been a while since we've had these little chats, right? Welcome into the new patrons. And I know it's been crazy and have no excuses, but I'm in this whole new world of life and business and trying to manage all of it. So please continue to bear with me as these releases I know haven't been regular, but I'm attempting to. And as you may know, in 2 weeks, I will become a dad for the second time. So, yes, my time will be limited again, but I'm planning on finishing this book before then, so wish me luck. I also want to really shout out my patrons. We know we have some goals set, and while it isn't the worst thing to see people go because they came and supported and things change, but we did lose some patrons, and I want to thank those who have been with us. And all have been important, but I appreciate you, even if you support just a little bit. But for those that have been here supporting through all of this, I ask this favor, please keep it up. It means the world to me. It's the only way I can keep this thing going. And you know, like on a personal note, I'd love to hear from you. If you have a minute, drop me a line. Check in on your life. I hope things are going well. And I hope that I can remain an important part of this and these connections that we have. And anyway, I'm just saying I'm very grateful for you and all my patrons who are with us now or before. Thank you. And listeners too. You know, I haven't, like I said, done one of these pre-episode check-ins for a while because I have this short window of recording and I want to give you the best. But anyone listening, feel free to give me a follow, reach out, let me know what you think on Twitter or Instagram, Phil in Sendai. Some podcast news. Hey, we were back in the top 100 games podcasts this last month. Very cool. We hit over 500,000 listeners. 500,000 have listened to this thing. Wow. And we were the #1 games podcast in Trinidad and Tobago this last week. So thank you, binge listeners there. You guys were crushing it. Thank you so much. We're getting close to wrapping this one, book 1 of the Mercadian cycle up, so stay tuned. Let's get going. Chapter 22. Silently, the team crept up the passageway alongside the subterranean hangar. Gerard led the way, accompanied by Sisse, Davis, and Fewsteam. Some distance behind them, at rear guard, stalked the hulking figure of Tongarth. His 5 swords against a Phyrexian armada. But these 5 swords had faced down ghouls, and dryads, and dragon engines, and they had won. They had surprise on their side, and Weatherlight called to Gerard. "She's above, in the cavern on that side," he had said, gesturing beyond the huge columns of stone that spanned a mile from ceiling to floor. "They must have moored her, but she could get rest on the ground. She's there. I'm sure of it." Gerard was not given to mysticism, so these spoken certainties had seemed nothing short of oracles. He had insisted the group retreat up the side passage, taking the fastest route around the huge cavern. Thrice along the way, they had encountered more Mercadians, and thrice more had cleaned up the resultant mess and removed the torches from their sconces. So far, no alarm had been raised. In time, they reached the entrance of the upper cavern. As they watched, a ship rose in stately grandeur from the central pit and sailed gracefully down the tunnel to the side. The level of activity within was remarkable. Along one wall lay an armory with bin after bin of goblin bombs. Human workers gingerly loaded the incendiary devices to crates and set the crates on their skids with rollers on their bottoms. Phyrexian dock workers, mindless creatures, stooped in their traces, pulling the skids down long aisles to various ships. Crews conveyed thousands upon thousands of bombs into bomb bays. There was a sense of urgent activity, the feeling of a vast project nearing completion. Each of those explosives had been fashioned with the intent of killing someone, or many folk, the folk of Dominaria. Gerard turned to the crew members gathered about him in the shadows. He gestured. "Weatherlight, he's there. About 100 ships in. Do you see?" Sissy's eyes were grim as she marked the spot. "Yes, and a whole army of Phyrexians between us and the ship." "We'll use that army to our advantage," Gerard replied. "Between the armory and the bombs loaded on the ships, should be able to start a good-sized chain reaction." want the blasts to lead out into the main cavern. See how many of the finished ships we can destroy. We'll create an avenue that'll let us fly out of here. Perhaps we'll destroy the entire fleet."
"This is a plan I can wholeheartedly approve,"
Tongarth said, eagerly gripping his striva. "Here at the entrance is an unguarded vessel loaded with bombs. We'll sneak over to it, take as many as we can carry. Sis and I will set charges leading out into the main cavern. Tongarth, Fushteam, Dabas, you'll set charges in this cavern. Target especially ships with full payloads. Head toward Weatherlight. Set off the charges, and when the guards go to investigate, take the ship. See if you can get it up and running."
"What if we can't?"
Tongarth asked. "Then abandon the ship, get more bombs, and blow the whole cavern," Gerard said decisively. "Better to lose Weatherlight than to let this armada attack Dominaria." He smiled humorlessly. "Still so wholehearted, Tongarth?"
"No,"
growled the Minotaur.
"It's the right plan, though. Of course, blowing the whole cavern might bring the entire mountain down on our heads."
He was speaking also for Dabas and Fushteam, who glanced uneasily up at the vast stone roof that arced above them. Gerard nodded. "Yes, it might. It's a risk we'll have to take. Is everyone ready?" Heads nodded. "Okay, let's go." Watchful and stealthy, they darted to a nearby ship. It was a one-person skiff with a long, bony prow and orange wings that folded like paper fans to aft. Sisay scrambled up the leathery fuselage and into a goblin-sized cockpit. Her practiced eyes soon identified the bomb bay doors. She triggered them. Bombs spilled out across the floor. Gerard and the others cringed back for a moment before swiftly loading their arms. Laden with the heavy black goblin bombs, Tongarth, Dabas, and Fushteam moved swiftly and silently along the wall of the cavern toward Weatherlight. Gerard looked at Sisay. "Ready?" Before she could respond, a klaxon suddenly shrieked. A brazen voice squalled, echoing off the cavern walls. "Intruder alert! All troops to battle posts! Intruder alert!" With a shout, Gerard lay Sisay down the corridor to the main cavern. Ahead, 2 goblin skiffs rose beyond the railed causeway. Gerard hurled one of his bombs, catching the lead craft squarely. There was a loud explosion. The skiff tipped sharply, spilling most of its passengers into the abyss. They screamed as they fell, their cries fading into the vast pit below them. The injured craft turned twice and slipped below the level of the causeway. The same instant, Sisay threw a bomb that enveloped the second shuttle in a cloud of white-orange flame. The vehicle dropped to the cavern floor, and the goblins aboard fell or stumbled away from it. The air was filled with the nauseating smell of burning flesh. Gerard and Sisay reached the edge of the pit and looked down. The plummeting skiff had struck several other ships. At least one was alight, burning brightly some 75 feet below where they stood. Gerard could see the forms of the dock workers running to and fro, attempting to stifle the flames. "So much for stealth," Sisay commented wryly. "Aim for the biggest ships," Gerard bellowed. He threw his remaining bombs one by one. The first struck a massive ship 200 feet below. Its deck exploded. Gerard could feel the force echo through the floor of the cavern. Flames shot up from the ship, scorching the hull of the craft immediately above it. The rigging and ropes of the second vessel caught fire, and in a few moments, it too was ablaze. The first ship shivered from stem to stern with another enormous explosion. Its bow tipped downward, then it fell, a fiery meteor streaking down into darkness. As it went, it rebounded from several other vessels, and they also caught fire. Other bombs rained down. The sound of explosions was magnified by the cavern until Gerard felt as if he were being shaken to pieces. Flames leaped upward, ship after ship twisted in its death agony and fell at the cries of those who had been working on them. Some, bearing full payloads of bombs, exploded in white-hot sunbursts. They flung flaming shrapnel out to slice causeways and slay workers and ignite more vessels. A skiff wound its way upward, turning and twisting to avoid the explosions and fires. It burst from the pit. Gerard hurled his last bomb, which caromed off the skiff's side and exploded harmlessly in the air beyond. "I'm out. Me too." Here's where the fun begins. Chiron dropped from the vessel onto the causeway, accompanied by several Mercadian guards whose livery smoked and smoldered. Each guard bore a trident and a fiery will to use it. Gerard found himself facing a massive Mercadian, easily 7 feet tall. The man had a face streaked with soot and oil. He gave a yell of rage as he brought his trident down on Gerard. The armsmaster dodged and parried with his sword. Its blade rang against the trident's metal handle. He drew back his sword for another stroke and was pushed violently from behind. His weapon almost flew from his hand as he stumbled forward, tearing the skin of his knuckles against the stone floor. There was a whiz and a thud above his head, a peculiar choking gargle. Gerard looked up. The Mercadian stood stunned. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. His hands clutched a trident whose spines were embedded in his chest. The Mercadian coughed. More blood came from his mouth. Then he fell backward and lay still. Sisay had pushed Gerard out of the way of a thrown trident. Now she came to her feet in a quick roll and swung her sword at the weaponless warrior. His head bounced along the floor as his body collapsed at her feet. With a roar, Gerard rejoined the fight. His sword darted like a swooping falcon. Where it sank its tip, bodies went down in spray. In moments, most of the goblins fell. 3 broke away and ran for their lives towards the surface tunnels. Gerard and Sisay let him go, busy with the guards that remained on their feet. Gerard attacked one with a blow so powerful it flung his enemy back against the causeway rail. The guard wavered for a moment on the edge of the pit and then, with a scream, toppled and plunged. Sisay, meanwhile, ran another guard through with a single thrust. In the follow-through of that stroke, she bashed the final guard to the ground with her elbow. A quick sword jab ended his struggle. The battle was over. 13 dead Mercadians, and Chiron lay in a bloody mess on the causeway. Beyond, explosions and flames were spreading. Most of the ships were burning. A few skiffs maneuvered among them, but flaming vessels plummeted all around. One skiff, packed with refugee goblins, went down beneath the blazing hull of a huge warship. The Chiron were thrown from their craft and fell squealing into oblivion. "Nice work," Gerard said breathlessly, clapping Sisay on the back. "Let's get to that ship," Sisay panted.
"That's a plan I approve. Wholeheartedly."
The cavern rocked with another massive blast. Stones fell from the ceiling and bashed the already burning ships. Cracks spread along the roof. On the far side of the hangar, a tunnel collapsed in a cloud of dust and rubble. Gerard and Sisay turned and raced toward Weatherlight. Even as they did, the floor beneath them shivered. Great boulders fell from the ceiling. A crack split the floor, extending from the edge to the pit. Sisay stumbled and almost fell, but Gerard pulled her to her feet and ran on. They pelted up the passage. Behind them, a skiff rose from the pit. Goblin faces twisted in grimaces of fear. With a deafening crash, a section of the cavern roof caved in. It fell like a huge hammer atop the skiff, pulverizing Chiron and flattening the top of the craft even as it flung it to the floor. The skiff struck rocky ground, which in turn buckled. The floor dropped into the space below it. The mountain trembled. Gerard and Sisay fled up the passageway as the tunnel collapsed in their wake. Up they ran, their legs aching. The way seemed endless, and their shadows leaped wildly in the flickering torchlight. "Even if we reach the ship, how do we fly it out?" Sisay panted.
"We'll worry about that if we live long enough."
All day and all night, a storm had gathered above the city. Its black bulk blotted out moon and star and bore down on the mountain below. Unlike most storms, this one did not hover overhead. It crouched on the shoulders of the people. It gave weight to the ominous musings in every heart. It squeezed every pair of lungs until bitter introspection oozed forth in whispers of dread. Chiron have captured the Uniter. They've killed Ramos. The storm is his wrath. He will crash to the earth again, not in fire, but in flood. Where private dreads mingled, they had mixed and became public fury. The storm that mounded itself atop the city awoke a second storm in the streets below. A storm of rage, of revolution. The Chiron are parasites! They are apostates! They can kill Ramos, but they cannot kill us! We can kill them! Morning light did not come to storm-swathed Mercadia. Sun rays could not dispel clouds so deep, nor did peace return to the streets. Tridents were impotent against such rage. Thunderheads rumbled their ominous threats, and mobs shouted their calls to arms. Lightning flickered across the sky in awesome anticipation, and Ramosans marched along the streets in open rebellion. Laheim lifted his voice to the heavens. People of the mountains, rise! You have nothing to lose but your chains! The storm broke. A gigantic fist of water fell from the skies and smashed into the city. The bashing torrents of rain bore among them winged sky scouts who dropped on soldiers in the street. Water wizards descended, lightning bright, and sent jags of power to blaze through guard towers. Smoking corpses tumbled from parapets. Other Cho'Aram warriors and archers rose from storm drains to join the rebellion. Chomano led them, with the healer Oram at his side. In the deluge, fountains across the city overflowed. From their deeps rose merfolk. Limned in stormlight, they were glorious and horrific. Conch masks streamed rainwater, iridescent scales gleamed goblin blood, pearly tridents skewered boarmen and Cateran enforcers. Fish had become spearfishers, Rashadan harpooners had joined the vengeful spirits of the sea, wind-lashed and water-soaked, slim seafarers slew giants, bullmen and monsters. The markets, too, rebelled. Farmers loosed jolvols upon the very soldiers who had extorted money to allow them in the city. Traders dropped tally sheets and lifted swords, and drove the guard out. Slaves rose from their hypnotic stupor to pull to pieces the Caterans who had captured them for sale. At the head of the common army was the most uncommon young man, Atala, the tousled black hair. Some who glimpsed these rebel farmers and exotic warriors might have thought this coup from without, but the main body of rebels were Mercadians themselves, Ramosans and the common folk they had rallied. Scarface Lahaim led these marching minions through the streets. They took prisoners wherever they might. They made guards swear loyalty to the people and disavow Chiron rule. Many civilians joined them. The rebel army grew more mighty as it moved along. Whenever rebels found a Phyrexian, it was borne in chains to one of the dumping stations and hurled from the mountain. When the mayhem in the streets was complete, when the storms above and below were in full fury, an elite squad of rebels marched on the center of the corruption of Mercadia, the Magistrate's Tower. Chomano was gone. Orm lifted her eyes from the wounded Sky Scout she tended. In the streaming rain, she could see no more than 10 feet in any direction, but she knew Chomano was gone. She sensed it. There was only one place Chomano would have gone. First, Orm must heal this fallen scout. Drawing a deep breath of the watery air, Orm set her hands on the man's severed side. Her fingers glowed with the silver fire fueled by cascading rain. Warmth suffused the wound. Water mingled with blood and knit tissue to tissue. Pressing her eyelids together in concentration, Orm felt the muscles and skin fuse. In a few moments, the young man was whole again. Sitting back, Orm helped the scout rise. Go. Fight for the Rushwood. Fight for the Uniter. Fight for us all. Orm rose with him. She gave his hand one last squeeze and then released him. As the man moved off toward the raging battle, Orm headed up the street, toward the Magistrate's Tower, toward Chomano. She ran across the gray lawn to the tower steps. She drew her sword and moved cautiously up the winding stair. Storm clouds wreathed the tower. Cyclones battered its walls. Rain washed in a regular cascade down the stairs, making them treacherous. Lightning danced from cloud to ground and ground to cloud. Buildings burned with the voracious fire, red flames rivaling blue bolts. Deep cracks appeared in the street, and from them emerged orange flashes and booms, explosions in underground caverns. It seemed all of Mercadia would disintegrate in the clutch of this storm. Orm climbed into the shrieking heavens. Through several doors she could hear the sound of fighting, but continued on till she was near the top. At last she reached the apex of the tower. The great doors to the chamber of the chief magistrate were broken open, and a clash of swords came from within. Orm burst into the room. The chamber was in disarray. Tables and many of the low couches lay overturned. Before the throne were 3 goblins, advisors to the chief magistrate. They wielded short, crooked swords and were slashing at the figure who stood before them. Chomano. His dark face was contorted in anger, and his blade, long, curved, and slender, flashed in and out in a gleaming curtain of steel. He parried the blows of the creatures before him. At least one of the goblin babes was stained with blood, but the Cho'arm leader did not appear to be wounded. Someone cowered behind the throne, the chief magistrate. The white flesh about his throat jiggled in dozens of small pouches, and his great belly quivered with the panting fear. In one fat hand he held something long and slender, a goblin blowpipe. He lifted the pipe, pointing it at Chomano's back. Orm threw her sword. It left her hand trailing silver magic. The blade sang through the air, revolving in a great circle. It struck. The magistrate screamed. He stared stupidly at his severed wrist. A fountain of blood gushed from the wound. Blowpipe, sword, and hand thumped together to the ground. Orm gave him no time to recover. She rushed across the room and snatched up the blowpipe. Clapping it to her lips, she blew. The dart whispered as it left the pipe. It appeared in the magistrate's fat neck. The Mercadian's eyes rolled up into his skull. He gasped, gurgled, fell to the ground with a thump that shook the room. His remaining hand clasped spasmodically for a moment before it fell still. Chomano had made good use of the momentary distraction. With one stroke, he slashed open the chest of the Chiron before him. His backstroke lopped off the head of the second, The third turned to run, but the Cho-Arm leader made a tremendous cut downward. His saber clanged against the ground. The two halves of the goblin fell apart from one another in a cloud of blood and bone fragments. With a great bound, Chomano sprang over to the couches and bent over the figure lying on the floor. Orem joined him and gazed down at Lahaim. The Ramosan leader lay on his back, a blood-soaked cloth clutched to his left shoulder. His face was pale. He was unconscious. Orem pulled back the bloody cloth and pressed her hand to the wound. Silver fire emerged from her fingertips. Flesh slowly knitted. Chomano stroked her face.
I'm glad you came. You saved the leaders of the Cho-Arm and the Ramosans, both.
Lahaim's anguished expression faded. He gently awoke. Orem said to Chomano, I was only repaying the favor. In chains, Hannah staggered up the engine room stairs. Her guards hauled her upward with an unusual brusqueness. Her shackles made such a clangor in the passage that she had not heard the explosions in the cavern till she gained the deck. Then the blasts were omnipresent. The cavern's mouth was collapsing in a shower of stone and sand. Figures rushed up the path just ahead of the killing cascade. They ran from a crushing death toward a fiery one. In a regular line from the entryway, Phyrexian ships exploded. Red blasts awoke beneath their keels. They bounded up, hull carapaces cracking like eggshells. Ram-headed prows tipped forward. Horn-studded sterns flipped backward. Amid shattered glass and rent steel and scorched wood flew the crushed bodies of Chiron, Mercadians, Phyrexians. Where fire reached bomb payloads, the results were even more spectacular. In shattering succession, small blasts awoke large ones. Nearer and nearer the armory they went, until a blooming sun awoke on one side of the chamber. It was blinding, deafening, and for a moment it obliterated all. All. The few guards who remained on Weatherlight ducked, covering their heads. Hannah shied back. On the cavern floor below, Volrath and the rest of his guard fell to their faces. As suddenly as the blast had began, it ended. Blue smoke belched out across a crackling ceiling. The smell of lightning filled the chamber. Hannah's guard barked orders. His shouts were whisper quiet after the blast. He hauled Hannah to Weatherlight's rail and forced her to kneel. Her chained hands struck the deck before her. The guard pressed her head to the wood. Another Mercadian, tall and muscular, stomped up along the planks. His sword had a cleaver-like head and heavy as an axe. His massive boots ground to a halt beside Hannah.
Put your neck on the rail,
the man shouted. Without moving, Hannah replied, What if the ship breaks down again? Who'll fix it?
Put your neck on the rail.
The order was followed by a kick from one of those massive boots. Swallowing, perhaps for the last time, Hannah lifted her neck into position. The executioner's sword flashed firelight as it rose. With an almighty roar, steel descended. Razor-sharp metal cut through nape and spine and throat to emerge streaming gore. The severed head vaulted free, bounced on the rail, and tumbled in a sanguine spray down toward the floor of the cavern. But it was not Hannah's head, nor was it the executioner's sword that had severed it. A bloody striva swooped harmlessly over Hannah's neck, and she gaped down at her executioner's blinking skull. Turning, Hannah saw her liberator. "Tahngarth!" she exclaimed in amazement. He did not return the greeting, too busy hoisting a guard who was impaled on his striva. Tahngarth hurled the struggling figure toward the rail. The body struck a pair of goblins and bore them overboard. Nearby, Fustim and Dabis fought two more guards. Unmade by unison strokes, the soldiers fell. One of them landed atop the keys to Hannah's shackles. "Get the keys!" she shouted. Tahngarth finished a final guard and went to fetch them. He returned and knelt beside Hannah, fitting metal into the lock. "You arrived just in time," she said.
How's the ship?
He asked as he worked. "Fixed. Perfected. More powerful than ever," she replied. "It's complete at last, Tahngarth. Get these chains off me and the ones off Karn. He's below. And we'll get this ship into the air. We'll fly it out of here." No sooner had she said those words than the shackles clicked. Chains tumbled to the planks.
It won't be so easy. The flight path is blocked.
Rising, Hannah stared out bleakly beyond the rail. The entry to the cavern was completely sealed by a landslide. Her gaze lingered only a moment on that impediment, though. "It's worse than that," she pointed. Below, in the midst of smoldering ships, stood Volrath and his company. 40-some soldiers surrounded two figures, Sisse and Gerard.